91% of Scots are crammed into the country's urban south, while the Highlands, a region once home to nearly a third of all Scots, are emptier than Russia. Today, there are just 8 people per square kilometer. Yet 200 years ago, these glens teemed with families rooted by ancient rites. How did a thriving northern society become a manufactured wilderness? And why does almost no one live here now? The answer begins with a single, ruthless change. Across the map of Scotland, the numbers tell a story that is hard to believe. Out of more than 5.5 million people, nearly everyone is packed into a handful of towns and cities, most of them in the narrow central belt that stretches from Glasgow to Edinburgh. The rest of the country, hundreds of miles of mountains, lochs and glens, is almost empty. In the Highlands, the average is just 8 or 9 people per square kilometer, a figure you would expect in the heart of Siberia or the Bolivian Altiplano, not in a modern European nation. Census data from 2022 shows the Highland Council area, which covers a third of Scotland's land, has fewer than 250,000 residents. Inverness, the Highlands' only city, holds just 60,000 people. Meanwhile, Glasgow alone is home to over 650,000, squeezed into an area with more than 3,200 people per square kilometre. The contrast is staggering. 91% of Scots live on just 2.3% of the land. The rest is a patchwork of empty glens, abandoned crofts, and scattered villages. 2 centuries ago, the Highlands held nearly a third of Scotland's population. Today, it is less than 1 in 12. This is not the outcome of natural geography or climate. It is the result of decisions made by people, enforced by policy, and still visible in every ruin and empty valley north of the Central Belt. In the Highlands of the 1700s, nearly 300,000 people lived scattered across glens and straths, bound together by a way of life older than memory. Land belonged not to individuals, but to the people as a whole, a belief known as dúthchas. Generations of families worked the same soil, their rights secured by custom and protected by the chief, who was seen less as a landlord and more as a father to his people. The clan system was both a social safety net and a source of pride, with every member tied to the land through shared ancestry and obligation. That world began to unravel after the defeat at Culloden in 1746. The British government, determined to break the power of the clans, passed the Acts of Proscription. Overnight, tartan, bagpipes, and even the Gaelic language became symbols of rebellion. Chiefs were stripped of their ancient authority and transformed into mere proprietors, encouraged to treat their land as a commodity. The old bonds of dúthchas, rights rooted in tradition, were replaced by a new order where profit and ownership ruled. This was more than a change in law. It was a blow to the heart of Highland society. The customs that had held communities together for centuries were now criminalized. The chiefs, once protectors, faced a stark choice: cling to tradition and risk ruin, or embrace the new economic logic that would soon sweep across the land. The Highlands, once full of people and purpose, stood on the edge of a transformation that would leave scars for generations. Cheviot sheep offered a promise that Highland families never could: pure profit. A single sheep farm could bring in twice as much income as all the tenant farmers on the same land. What once supported 5 bustling townships, hundreds of people, could now be managed by just 4 shepherds and 3,000 sheep. Wool prices surged in the late 1700s, and estate ledgers began to reflect the new arithmetic. Landlords saw rents rise from £7,000 to over £20,000 within a generation, all while slashing their labor costs. The numbers were clear. Replacing people with sheep meant more money, less trouble. For landlords burdened by debt, and the costs of their city lifestyles, the math was irresistible. The old run-rig system, with its crowded patches of black cattle and grain, brought in meager returns. By the 1810s, sheep farming cut the cost of labor from around £0.50 per acre to just a fifth. Cheviot fleeces fetched up to 7 shillings a stone, outpacing the falling prices of cattle and kelp. The estate's profits multiplied, while the people who had worked the land for generations became surplus to requirements. The logic of improvement was simple: more sheep, fewer tenants, higher rents. The landowners called it progress. For the Highlanders, it spelled disaster. Tens of thousands of Highlanders were driven from their homes between the late 1700s and mid-1800s. Parish records, estate letters, and shipping manifests trace the scale. Somewhere between 70,000 and 150,000 people uprooted, scattered across the world. The landlords who ordered these removals rarely saw individuals. In their eyes, the Highlands teemed with what the Countess of Sutherland called an infinite multitude roaming at large in the old way, a surplus population standing in the way of profit and progress. For the people themselves, eviction meant the end of a world. Families who had worked the same ground for centuries watched their homes burned or torn down, their livestock seized, their fields turned over to sheep. Many were forced onto overcrowded coastal plots, but for thousands more, the only escape was across the sea. Landlords often paid for emigration simply because it was cheaper than supporting the destitute. Ships left for Nova Scotia, the United States, Australia, and New Zealand, carrying away entire communities. The Gaelic language, once the voice of the Highlands, survived more strongly in Canadian villages than in Sutherland itself. Even now, about 2,000 people in Nova Scotia still speak Gaelic, a living echo of those lost glens. The bitterness of exile lingered. In 1854, when the British Army called for Highland recruits to fight in the Crimean War, the answer came sharp. "You robbed us of our country and gave it to the sheep. Let sheep defend you." The landlords called it improvement. The people called it betrayal. Patrick Sellar arrived in Strathnarva with orders that left no room for mercy. The Sutherland estate, stretching over 1.5 million acres, was to be emptied of people and filled with sheep. In just a few years, 15,000 Highlanders were forced from their homes so that 200,000 Cheviot sheep could graze the hills. Sellar's method was simple and brutal. Once a family was evicted, their house was torched to keep them from returning. The flames did not spare the vulnerable. Margaret Mackay, a widow in her 90s, was dragged from her burning cottage. She died 5 days later. At his trial for culpable homicide, witnesses recalled Sellar's chilling words. "Damn her, the old witch. She has lived too long. Let her burn." The jury, made up of fellow landowners, acquitted him in less than an hour. Sellar went on to lease the very lands he had cleared, becoming one of Scotland's wealthiest sheep farmers. The cost was measured in ruined lives and blackened stone. Donald MacLeod was 20 years old when he watched his world vanish in fire. On a June night in 1814, he climbed a hill above Strathnarva and looked down on devastation. He later wrote that from his vantage point, he counted around 250 houses burning across the valley, each one a home, each one a life uprooted. The flames did not die quickly. For days, the smoke hung over the glen, drifting as a grim signal to anyone within miles. MacLeod remembered the fires burning for 6 days, until nothing remained but blackened stone and ash. In his words, "Many of the owners were my relatives, but whose present condition, whether in or out of the flames, I could not tell." The destruction was so complete that a ship, lost in the haze off the northern coast, found its way at night by the glow of the burning settlements. For the people of Strathnarva, there was no return. The land that had sheltered families for centuries was emptied in less than a week, its memory scorched into those who survived. Today, the Highlands remain nearly empty, while the central belt swells ever denser. Land ownership in Scotland is still among the most concentrated in Europe. How we remember these empty glens shapes the choices we make now about community, belonging, and who truly has the right to call a place home.